I expected Jaws to be deeper. When the movie ended, I felt disappointed, but maybe I was wrong. I was probably looking for depth in the wrong places. I resisted watching the movie because I'm not so good with horror and suspense, but I had to do it. 1975, Steven Spielberg. Let me tell you what happened between me and the movie, because it's an interesting story and maybe we can discover something in the end. So I start from the beginning. 5-7 minutes into the movie, I realized I was already identifying with the main character, Chief Brody. And that made me wonder why. I know almost nothing about this man. Why am I already identifying with him? The situation opens in a small island, a little town, east of the States. A shark kills a girl in the ocean. Brody is the chief of police. He comes from New York. He's new in the island and he has to do something about it. And I was surprised about how I was identifying with him in just a few minutes. As the situation unraveled, I realized I was not identifying with the character, but with the situation. We can put it this way: I was not identifying with the character as a psychological human being, but as a position in a narrative structure. The thing is that the summer season is starting. Tomorrow is the 4th of July. A lot of tourists are arriving town. They are getting to the island. And the tourist business is afraid of the situation, and they try to deny and cover up the shark situation because it threatens the business. So Brody is the only one that sees the danger in the situation. So when I noticed that was the picture, I realized, okay, I'm not identifying with him as a complex human being because I know nothing about him. I was identifying with him as a position in that narrative structure, which is an old pattern. We can all easily relate to that position of being the one that sees the danger in something while all the people don't. It's an old narrative pattern. I would say an ancient pattern. Even if you didn't live a specific situation like that, you can easily relate to that position. You are the one that sees something that others don't. There's a famous play by Henrik Ibsen called The Enemy of the People, about this doctor that finds out that waters in a beach are contaminated and the season is starting. So it's the same pattern: life against business, or business against life. So we can easily relate to him because we understand that's the position, the right one. As in Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up would be a more contemporary version of the same pattern, more satirical and thus more polarized version, where good guys and bad guys are clearly defined and we as viewers know exactly where to identify, to identify with. Maybe that's enough for a movie to work. I mean, setting up this pattern for you as a viewer to identifying someone or something means recognizing something. So you can identify that pattern and relate to that story. And maybe that's why Brody doesn't need to become an especially complex psychological character. So I said, okay, now the movie has established the situation. It will start developing Brody as a character, as a more complex human being. But it doesn't. Halfway through the movie, the social conflict, this war between life and business, disappears, is abandoned, and the movie becomes a pure adventure movie. 3 guys trying to kill the shark. So when the movie ended, I felt slightly disappointed, I would say, because I had expected the ocean and the shark to work in a more explicitly symbolic way. I was looking for more explicit symbolism in the story, in the movie. I expected the movie to develop its characters in a more complex way, and I was expecting the movie to go deeper through its narrative, through the plot and dialogue, into the symbols. So my first reaction, my first thought was, well, this is kind of shallow. Come on, horror movies are supposed to express our innermost fears, the collective unconscious fears of the whole, of humanity as a whole, and so on. And so I was kind of disappointed. But then, to be fair, the movie does suggest some things thematically, through plot, through dialogue. First of all, Brody, the main character, is afraid of water. He talks about insecurity in New York versus this ideal place, amity. Friendship is the name of the island. So we can read that he says there hasn't been any murder in the island for 25 years. So we can say, okay, the shark can represent what is repressed in this supposedly ideal place. And then the other characters, Quint, this expert in sharks, this crazy character that wants to kill the shark and get paid. And Hooper, the character played by Richard Dreyfuss, who's a scientist and gets to town to help kill the shark. They are developed as characters. We know their stories. Quint has this famous monologue where he talks about his traumatic story. These 1,000 men were in the ocean for like 4 days and they were eaten by sharks and so on. So we understand that Quint is actually traumatized and he's trying to kill this shark as a revenge, as if he was a version of Captain Ahab in Moby Dick. You know Moby Dick, the famous and beautiful novel by Herman Melville, where Captain Ahab is this man that gets his leg eaten by a whale, a white whale, so he's trying to kill the whale. And then this beautiful scene at night, these three guys, Quint and Hooper, start competing about their scars and showing off their scars, and they become kind of... It's interesting that the competition between these men, the competition game ends up in friendship, but Brody is apart, and while the other two are comparing their scars, Brody almost awkwardly lifts his shirt and looks down his pants as if he too had something to reveal but doesn't. And in the end, it's Brody who killed the shark and has overcome his fear of water. So yes, there is some character development, there are psychological and symbolic threads in the movie. But what really struck me is that the film never seems eager to underline those threads. It never stops and says, look how deep this is. They remain almost secondary, like quietly woven into the fabric of the film, let's say. So probably the movie isn't shallow, but it's simply not interested in insisting on its own depth, like underlying, see how deep this movie is. But still I felt like, there's not so much for me here, I thought, like I was expecting more. Come on, give me some more. And then something interesting happened. Days passed and I kept thinking about one specific shot in the movie. After the last attack in the beach in the first half of the movie, there's a moment where Brody is in the beach and turns and looks toward the ocean, and there's a cut, and as if it was a point of view shot, a zoom in that goes into the sea, passing the pier, this structure, of course a human structure. The zoom in goes past that structure and gets into the ocean. So I kept wondering why that shot. And I always try to trust those little obsessions, my little obsessions. If one image keeps returning, I assume the movie is still working on me. So I stop asking what is the movie trying to say or what does the story really mean, and I start asking why does this image keep living in my body? I try to honor my personal experience with the movie because that's the only way I can really find something new. Not so much about what the movie is about or what it really means, but what it means to me, to my personal experience. So why a zoom? Why doesn't the camera track into the ocean, like really moves toward the ocean? Well, first of all, tracking into the ocean would have been way more difficult and expensive production-wise. A zoom is more easy to do, but a zoom doesn't feel like the camera is moving. It's actually not the camera moving, but the lens moving. So it feels like vision stretching, like perception projecting itself into the distance. And that creates a completely different bodily sensation. It's way different when the camera actually moves and when it's the lens moving. When it's not the camera traveling, but the lens inside the camera moving, it feels more as if it was not your body, but your eyes moving, like an inner movement, like your eyes leaving your body. So I was reflecting on that, and suddenly I realized that's what Brody is actually doing. His consciousness is trying to enter something it cannot fully enter. The ocean. It feels as if in that moment of desperation and helplessness after the attack, Brody was projecting his consciousness into the ungraspable, trying to grasp the ungraspable. Because the ocean, both in a symbolic and also a concrete way, is kind of the deepest thing we can get in touch with, right? It's hard not to think of the ocean as something like the collective unconscious, as they say. The ocean as that to which our conscious mind cannot get into. Something that's beyond our conscious mind, something that's beyond our capacity to understand, to grasp. So I was obsessing about this shot, this zoom in, and suddenly I remembered another image. When in the middle of the movie they finally get into the ocean, Quint's boat is framed inside this giant shark jaw that's hanging in the cabin. And so I wonder, why frame it like that? So I said, okay, the movie is not called Shark, but Jaws, and the dots are starting to connect. Specifically these two shots, the pier framing the sea in the zoom in, the jaws framing the boat when it gets into the ocean. Frames inside frames. And I don't know, maybe this is too much of an interpretive leap, but at some point I started wondering whether those jaws belonged less to the shark and more to the ocean itself. Brody's vision is trying to go into that impossible depth, leaving the pier, the human structure behind, leaving that humanity behind, in that zoom in, going past that human structure, human control, and then the boat is getting inside the jaws in this particular framing. I mean, literally, in this framing, the boat is getting inside of those big jaws. And then I go back to, why is the movie called Jaws and not Shark? Is the movie actually talking about sharks or more about jaws? Why jaws? Is that zoom in trying to express this attempt to grasp the ungraspable, as if trying to bite the uncontrollable, to control the uncontrollable? Is it about our own human attempt to control things? Is the jaw actually the human jaw that tries to bite reality, control reality? I mean, I don't know. But why does the social conflict developed in the first half of the movie is utterly abandoned in the second half? Is it really abandoned? Or can we read the second half as a more unconscious level of the first half? Can we read the second half of the movie, this adventure moment, as a more unconscious reading of the first social problem that's developed in the first half? No final answers here, but notice what happened. The interpretation, my interpretation, these ideas I'm sharing here, they didn't come first. They emerged from a physical perception, from a perceptual experience caused by the framing, by the movement of the lens of the camera, not necessarily out of plot and dialogue. So that's probably what I realized. I realized I had been looking for symbolism in the plot, in the dialogue, while the movie was kind of quietly building it through perceptual experience, through perception. Not dialogue, not psychology, not explanation, but framing, lens, rhythm, physical sensation. So probably it's not that the ocean means something, but that the camera makes me feel the ocean in a way that words or dialogue could ever do. And this becomes a bigger question. Maybe cinema doesn't primarily create meaning through stories. Maybe stories simply organize and orient our attention. Maybe stories are just like the pier that helps us get into the water. But then the water, the deeper meaning sometimes, or usually in movies, emerges from the way images and sounds organize our perception as viewers. And probably that's why the movie stayed with me after days. Not because I understood its story, but because I felt something before I could even think it or think about it. And I'm still trying to put that feeling into words. I mean, I didn't get it. I don't have a conclusion. And that's beautiful. Because maybe, who knows, if the movie has stated its meanings through a more explicit dialogue or plot, I would have just said, okay, I get it, and then forget about it. And maybe this disappointment I felt when the movie ended actually gave me room to feel something more ambiguous and reflect in a more subtle way. When it's the cinematic experience that creates this ambiguous feeling, maybe the experience sticks with you even more as when the movie explains it all through words, dialogue, and plot. So yes, probably my question is not what does this movie mean, but rather why won't this image leave me alone after days and days? Maybe the movie is not expecting you to find its hidden meaning, but inviting you to a more vibrant, ambiguous, and complex dialogue. So that's my invitation when you watch a movie. More than your ideas, trust your obsessions. The shark is here. Should I shut up? Show me your jaws. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Leave me your comments and questions, and see you in the next one.